Good morning, students, and welcome to this edition of Communication, which deals with concept of listening and barriers in communication. This is a presentation by me, Dr. Jacqueline Amral. Of the 4 language skills, which is listening, speaking, reading, and writing, listening is the most important skill in communication. It is of immense importance because if you listen, you will definitely grow personally as well as professionally. It helps reduce misunderstandings. It fosters empathy and strengthens relationships. Listening also is very, very important when you need to deal with team collaborations. You must understand the task on hand, and this will significantly boost productivity. Let me begin by telling you a little story on listening. Now, there are 2 characters. One is Rahul, who is a carpenter, and he is very proud of his craftsmanship. He is the best in the town. And we have another character whose name is Ravi. He is a close friend of Rahul's. So one day, Ravi comes to Rahul and says, "Listen, Rahul, I think you need to mend your house, do a few architectural changes because the planks that are supporting the ceiling and the planks that are supporting the floor have got deep cracks and they need to be repaired before the rains set in." Rahul, who is very proud of his craftsmanship, says, "Well, you don't have to tell me what I am supposed to do. I am the best in the town. I know what it is that I have to do with my house." This pride carries on. The piece of advice given by Ravi is not taken well, and Rahul ends up losing his entire house when there's a downpour. Now, what do we learn from this story? The story tells us that when people want to tell us something, we must not just hear, we must listen, because listen always has an action. Hearing is a natural function of the ear, but listening goes deeper. Listening is when you take the feedback and do something to boost productivity. But in this case, it does not happen. And as a result of his pride, Rahul loses his entire home. Today we will talk about the types of listening, and keeping this story in mind, you should be able to understand it better when we talk about listening in its totality. What are the types of listening? Let's begin with informational listening. I listen because I want to learn. I listen because somebody is imparting knowledge. I listen because I want to understand new information on a topic which is being presented. The next is comprehensive listening. I listen not just because I have to write an exam, but I listen because I want to understand the content and the context. I want to have a deeper meaning of the overall concept that is being taught. Comprehensive listening is done when you're listening to lectures, when you're listening to training programs, and today when you're listening to the very first communication skill, which is listening. Then you have discriminative listening. Discriminative listening, as the word itself suggests, you understand the meaning based on the tone of the voice, based on the verbal cues, and based on body language. Now, a child discriminates between, or rather I should say deciphers, the mother's voice from the father's voice just by the tone. The mother's voice is mellow and soft, and the father's voice is deep-throated and probably harsh. But the child learns that the difference between a male and a female voice. As the child grows up, he then begins to understand accents and dialects. So, for instance, in Telugu itself, you have many dialects. You have the Rayalaseema Telugu, you have the Andhra Telugu, you have the Telangana Telugu. What makes you understand it is your ability to discriminate the sounds in each of these languages. Let's take English for instance. You have words which are pronounced as environment in a particular dialect and environment in another dialect. We in India say among for among, amongst for amongst. And there are many such words which will help you distinguish whether you are speaking the language correctly as it is to be spoken, because it is not our language. Though we have adopted it, we have adopted English as our language, we need to still retain the neutral accent where everybody in the world will understand when you speak. So instead of saying world, we should say world. So these verbal cues help us interpret meaning beyond words. The next is critical listening. Critical listening is when you evaluate what the speaker is doing or saying. You judge each of his statements, and based on that, you make your decision. This is not right or wrong. These are types of listening and they overlap. And it is all right for them to overlap because we do use most of these, all of these, and some of these at times when we listen. Next, we have appreciative listening. Appreciative listening, I think all of you understand. When you're listening to music or your favorite podcast or your favorite television serial, you listen with a lot of pleasure and enjoyment. That is appreciative listening. Next is empathetic listening. Empathetic listening is also called therapeutic listening, where you listen because you wish to understand the feelings of the speaker, the emotions of the speaker. And empathetic listening also is called therapeutic for a reason that you can be somebody's confidant, you can help somebody out of a very difficult situation if you listen with empathy. Next is selective listening. Now, selective listening is, I think, what all students do these days. We listen only to parts of messages or a lecture, parts that interest us. We don't really listen comprehensively. So this is the opposite of comprehensive listening, selective listening. I listen only for what interests me. Now coming to the next one and the most important one, which is active listening. Now, active listening, as the very word suggests, you involve yourself completely in the act of communication. Along with the speaker, you are also showing interest, you are also giving feedback, and you are engaging yourself with the speaker as he speaks, without judging, without being critical, without evaluating, without being selective in your listening. So with these types of listening now, I am going to concentrate on active listening. Active listening is a deliberate act of communication. That's why it's called active, where the listener focuses on what the speaker is saying. Here, the point to note here is you are focusing, engaging on what the speaker is saying, not evaluating, not waiting to ask a question. Secondly, you want to understand the thoughts of the speaker. And that's why sometimes when the speaker is disturbed, he says, I have lost my train of thought. It's because somebody in the audience has disturbed the thought of the speaker. So, understanding the thoughts of the speaker is a sign of a good listener, an active listener. And last but certainly not the least is the speaker and the listener become one in the act of communication. They don't just hear words, but they interpret the speaker's emotions, the intent of the speaker. What is the speaker intending to say? And of course, the unspoken message, like his body language, his facial expressions, his gesture, his posture, and his movement, like we saw yesterday in the kinesics of language. So, what are the key aspects of active communication? The first one is attentive silence. That means you do not interrupt the speaker while the speaker is speaking. So, how do you tell the speaker that you have understood? You nod occasionally. You don't jump to give advice. You don't jump up to ask a question. You make eye contact, which is culturally appropriate, because in the Japanese culture, they do not like to maintain eye contact for too long. It is a sign of disrespect. But in most other cultures, eye contact is considered culturally appropriate, because then you're telling the speaker that you are listening intently. Next, you have an open posture, which says that you are now receiving information without judging him. The moment you cross your arms, it is a closed gesture, a closed posture. I am refusing to listen to you anymore. Therefore, when you talk about attentive listening or active listening, it should be an open posture. Then you also mirror the expressions of the speaker. So if the speaker cracks a joke and smiles, you must do the same. If the speaker talks to you in a whisper, because this is something that is called an aside, just because he wishes to make an impact, then you must listen with that much more attention. You probably move forward and you give an ear to what he is saying. So you mirror the expressions of the speaker. Next is clarifying questions. Most often than not, when we ask questions, it's to unnerve, to disturb the speaker. But that's not right. An active listener will ask open-ended questions only because he wishes to gather more information, not to evaluate, but to gather more information. And that too, if the question round is open for the audience to ask questions. And then I've given you an example there. Let's say that the speaker is speaking on a topic of poverty. Now you can ask a question at the end of it saying, can you explain what you mean by poverty is a state of mind? Right? Now that is a question which will help you dig deeper in the subject. Let's look at the third point, avoiding interruption. Before the speaker completes his sentence, we tend to interrupt him. That is wrong. You let the speaker finish and then respond. The next one is summarizing. This tells us whether you have really paid attention to everything that the speaker has said. Summarizing skills in itself is an important skill. So you recap, as we say, you recap what important points have been made. So you make a statement like, so let me summarize, sir. You said you need Ravi to meet you on Friday and Ajay to meet you on Saturday. Did I get that right? Now that makes the speaker feel confident that he has been understood, he has been heard, and now action is taking place. Here is a quote which I really liked about speaking. The biggest communication problem is that we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And if you're doing that, please refrain from doing it from today. Now we're coming to the barriers to active listening. The first barrier that comes to my mind is physical barrier. If the ambience around you is noisy, somebody is talking all the time, there is chatter, 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 murmur, 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 that is a physical barrier for the speaker. Or if you have a hearing impediment, maybe you have a hearing problem and you keep on interrupting your neighbor to find out what the speaker has said, then that is a physical barrier. Also, if your phone connectivity is bad, and very often we use words like, sorry, I can't hear you, the signal is very low, I am not able to reach you, your voice is too faint, I can't hear you. Things like that tell us that there is a phone connection problem, and that's why it's a physical barrier. The next one is, if you are physically tired and you cannot sit to listen to the speaker, it shows in your body language. Or if you're running a fever or a temperature, or maybe you have an illness, it impairs your listening ability. Coming to the second point, which is called the psychological barrier. Psychological barrier is when you are judging the speaker even before the speaker finishes speaking. You immediately have preconceived notions about the speaker's ability, and so you begin to question him. That is a psychological barrier. Mentally, also, some people drift away from the conversation. While they pretend they are listening to you, they've actually gone into another world. They have zoned out. And the third is personal emotions dominate. Probably you have gone through something in the early hours of the morning at home which is unpleasant, and you kind of percolate that down to your listening in the classroom, or you're listening to a speaker, your teacher, your trainer. That dominates. When that dominates, it means that you have a psychological barrier. Then coming to the linguistic barrier. Yes, as I said in the beginning, discriminative listening. If you feel that the accent is very different from what yours is, then you tend to switch off. Okay? Or you use terminology which is not understood by the listener. So, as I said yesterday also, that if I use technical terms of engineering while I am teaching commerce students, obviously they will switch off because there is a language barrier. If I use high sounding words, rich vocabulary which you are not familiar with, or I use idiomatic expressions, then it becomes a linguistic barrier if it is not followed. And coming to the last barrier, cognitive barrier. I found these four very important, so I put it up for you. Cognitive barrier. Cognitive barrier is when I have too much of information being imparted and I cannot receive that much of information. We call it information overload. I cannot retain, I cannot understand, I cannot hold so many concepts and truths and facts and statistics. So I switch off after a point. And then what you do is you indulge in selective listening. I listen to only as much as I can take, or only as much as what interests me. With these active listening barriers, I'd like to now tell you what are the barriers of communication in general. And when I say in general, I'm talking about when you speak, when you read, when you write, and yes, when you listen. Now the physical barriers, as I said, external factors become important in this barrier, where there is noise, there is traffic noise, or there is a loudspeaker blaring and it is disturbing the speaker and the listener in the act of communication. That is a physical barrier. Or if you have poor internet connectivity, or a faulty microphone, or the distance between you and the speaker is rather large, That's a physical barrier. Or when you have an uncomfortable seating or lighting, then it becomes, because it is uncomfortable, it is a physical barrier. Next one, psychological and emotional barrier. When I say emotional barrier, we are talking about the mental state of a person who is going through a lot of turmoil because of a state of emotion that probably could be stress, could be anger, could be anxiety, and that interferes in his communication. So I have given you examples there that it becomes difficult to focus if you're going through an emotional upheaval. Also, if you have prejudices, you judge the listener, you judge the speaker even before listening to him. And we judge the speaker because of somebody else's opinion about that speaker. Somebody has already told you, oh, I heard the speaker, he's not really very good. So you've already switched off in your head. And when the speaker, even if he makes a beautiful speech, you have already a preconceived notion about him, so you will not listen to him. You've already judged him for not being a good speaker. The next one is close-mindedness. You are unwilling to open yourself to new ideas, and that is wrong. When you close your mind, it tells the other person that you are not willing to listen to anything, no matter how important it may be, because you just don't want to listen. You don't want to acquire the knowledge he's giving you. The next one is information overload. I've just spoken to you that in the listening part also. Too much of information also is bad, and the listener tends to switch off. Then we have language and semantic barriers. What do you mean by semantic? It is the meaning that comes through when somebody speaks. So as I said, when you're using too much of jargon or technical terms, not everybody understands. The choice of words, the diction, the arrangement of your words, all these interfere in your meaning, in your language, in your understanding, in your comprehension levels. Then you have ambiguity and vague phrasing. We need to meet soon. How soon is soon? Soon doesn't tell you a definite time frame. Even in the exam, a question paper would have definitely a question which says, write a brief note on communication, let's say. How brief is brief? There is ambiguity. So you should say, write about 150 words on communication. Now the student knows a definite word is 150, right? So be very, very careful when you are giving instructions especially. Do not make statements like, I'll meet you soon, or give me a brief report on. How brief is brief? Keep that in mind, and then you will know how to surmount or overcome these semantic barriers. The next one is, if you are speaking to a native speaker, see, we are non-native speakers of English because we've got it as a foreign language from another country. But yes, though we've adopted it and we've in fact influenced it so much with Indianisms, it still remains a foreign language. And when you're listening to a native speaker of English, you really struggle to understand his accent, and that results in a barrier. And the last one is, if you yourself do not have the correct grammar, you have dangling articles and your sentences don't really make any sense because of your grammar and spelling in writing, it causes confusion, then yes, it is a language and a semantic barrier. Next we have the cultural and the perceptual barriers. Cultural barrier. It is, I think all of us understand this very well, that language is culture specific, like I told you last time. Now, if you do or say something that is not in sync with the other person's culture, then obviously it is going to be a culture shock to that person. Now, when in Indian homes, when we enter our homes or when we enter a holy place, we generally are asked to take off our footwear. It's a sign of respect. It's also a part of our culture where we allow the holy space to be clean. We also don't wear our footwear into the house because we say in the Indian culture that we are leaving the negativity of the world outside the home before we enter it. Now, this is not understood by the Western world, and that can be a barrier. And then we have stereotyping. When you stereotype a certain role for a woman or a man, or what clothes a woman should wear, what clothes a man should wear, then you are stereotyping, you're stereocasting, you're casting people in blocks that you cannot wear a certain attire because you're a woman. You cannot do a certain task because you're a man, so on and so forth. And that causes cultural and perceptual barriers. And then we have organizational barrier. Organizational barrier at your workplace. In India, we are very particular about following hierarchy. We must believe that somebody who's at the top deserves more respect. Whereas your colleagues, your fellow mates, well, you can chill out with them. You can be a bit more informal. Then when your roles are not defined, that can end up in a structural barrier. Or when somebody does not impart the information, even if by way of circular or notice, to the rest of the people, then it can become a barrier. Sharing data, if you don't share it, it becomes a barrier. And then the other one is over-reliance on a certain media of communication. Either you have a face-to-face communication or you have a lack of it, or you have an over-dependency on emails or a lack of it, right? Then you have technological barrier. When your digital or platforms don't work properly. I have given examples of, let's say you have a Zoom meeting and suddenly the video goes off or the audio goes off, then we often say that we have a video or an audio glitch. This can be a technological barrier. Or if you are not well versed with using technology, then also it becomes a technological barrier. And of course, if you use emojis, too many of them in a text, people tend to misunderstand and misinterpret those emojis as being too casual, and that can result in a barrier. Now, the moment you think of repairing these barriers, then you are also repairing your communication. If not, then communication breaks down. And this is what we did yesterday. If communication breaks down, that's because you have failed to repair the barriers. Okay? You have refused to overcome or surmount those barriers. And I'm leaving you with this quote. It is false to assume that if one can talk, he can communicate. So that's wrong. Just because you can talk does not make you a good communicator. There have to be rules in place. The politeness theory comes in here. How polite are you? How gentle are you? How concerned are you about the other person's level of communication, of his language abilities, of his emotional abilities? How aware are you? That makes you a good communicator, and not just because you can talk fluently. With that, we come to the end of this lecture. Thank you.